Occidental Observer, or it's a three-part series of articles that was written last year, and I dug it up scrolling through the Jews.com.au Telegram page. You should go follow them on Telegram. I do share them somewhat frequently. Great page. And it was talking about the kind of rise of high density housing, of apartment living, and so on in Australia, and how prior to the Second World War, there was basically none of this going on in Australia. That the Australia was kind of built around the ideal of the great Australian dream of owning your own home, owning your own land, and there was great hostility in the population to apartment living. People thought that apartment living gave itself over to these kind of cosmopolitan lifestyles that create these kind of socialist kind of urbanites who engage in kind of promiscuity, homosexuality, and get predisposed to political radicalism, as opposed to don't have big families or anything like that. We wanted white suburbia. We wanted big backyard with a hills hoist, big house with many bedrooms, so that you can have 3 or 4 kids and have a normal family and conduct your affairs in a normal way. We wanted the church to be the tallest building in town. Not have these huge high rises dwarfing it. We didn't want to pack all of these people into these congested spaces. We wanted to have big community living, big families, and so on. But Jews came here in large quantities after the Second World War and were instrumental in building a lot of the first apartment blocks, particularly in Melbourne. And if you look in Sydney as well, like all the big property developers in Sydney, I mentioned Triggerboff and Meriton, but there are others like Stockland and a few others, disproportionately represented by Jewish architects, Jewish financiers. It's very interesting looking into this article. It really details how Jews were instrumental in transforming Melbourne and Sydney into these concrete jungles full of high density housing, and how, traditionally not many people actually lived in the city. Directly within the city, and then in the surrounding kind of urban areas, you had a lot of townhouses and things like that, not these big high-rise buildings. And then these guys go on to become key elements of the property lobby, which, during the 90s really got together, because in the early 90s and the mid-90s, immigration was massively unpopular in Australia. Even though the levels of immigration were way lower than they are today, way lower, people still thought it was too much. Opinion polling from the mid-90s says that about 70% of Australians at the time thought we were taking in too many immigrants. And this is at a time when immigration was 50,000 people a year, as opposed to the 400+ thousand that we've taken over the past 12 months. And that was still too much. And there were, the rise of Pauline Hanson and the One Nation Party and so on in the 90s was a reflection of that. They thought, well, this is unacceptable. These, wealthy property lobbyists, we need to change public perception. And they really organized together into these pro-growth, pro-population increase, pro-immigration lobbies. And they didn't care about increasing birth rates. That would take too long. They had this single-minded focus upon changing public perception around immigration. And because Jews were so instrumental in the development of the apartment industry in Australia, of apartment construction, financing, and so on, forming the kind of economy around high-rise apartment living and so on, that's where a lot of the richest Jews are in Australia, or in the kind of property developing industry, and they're throwing heaps of money into. So you can see here, this is from the Jews.com.au Telegram page. And, this is talking about the kind of property developers and construction companies and so on that are throwing the biggest amount of money into the property lobby, basically to lobby the government, literally for immigration as well as for planning approval. And we can see here on the list of the top 10 donors, 5 out of 10 have either set up by Jews or have Jewish leaders. So that's very interesting.
Is there some sort of law against special interests, outside groups donating that much money to the government, to certain political parties or politicians? Is that legal?
What do you mean?
Well, you're a Jewish guy who owns Westfield, for example, and and you're in property development or something like that. You're in some groups and people build apartments. You want to make more money, and so you want more immigrants in the country to sell more homes or sell more apartments, whatever, and make yourself richer. And so you start bribing government officials and specific parties that can actually bring more immigrants into the country. They call it lobbying or donors, but you're bribing them. You're bribing them, right? Is that legal to do that? You can just give as much money as you want to a political party and they'll take it and do what you say. That's how Australian democracy works in practice. Am I getting this wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a way of going about it that's legal. But effectively, the politicians will attend meetings with and get access from these lobbyist groups, particularly the business lobby, property lobby, finance lobby. These are the real big lobbies that are throwing around the biggest campaign donations and so on. And, they court favor with them. And actually, there's a kind of revolving door where their lobbying firms have a lot of ex-politicians working for them, or that people that end up going into politics start out working in these lobbying firms. I think Scott Morrison, who was prime minister recently, he was working for the property lobby before he actually became a politician in the Liberal Party. So it's a very incestuous relationship, and obviously because they're so wealthy, that gives them privileged access. Also, when it comes to the media, a lot of the biggest advertisers in media are also linked to the property industry in some way. And so the real estate is one of the biggest industries in Australia. So the media also has a vested interest in kind of courting favor with these entities as well. They want access to those sweet advertising bucks. And so they want to publish and print pro-immigration propaganda, which is what we see generally from right-wing or left-wing media in this country almost universally as a result. So, there's an incestuous relationship between all of these things, but it's just very interesting that there's such a strong Jewish element, something that I wasn't quite aware of until reading this 3-part series. I will post the 3-part series and I'll put some quotes on my Telegram or something maybe later tonight so that you can look at it tonight or tomorrow, the people at home. It's a very interesting angle that I think you don't really hear often discussed.
It's a dirty system, isn't it? It's a very dirty system where everyone works for someone, everyone takes money from someone, and there's no actual genuine representation for the interests of the working class. It's just a dirty system. That's all I can say about it. The more I learn about it, the more of these streams I participate in, the more melancholy I become. So is there any green pills? Is there any good news to report, my friend? What can we talk about that's either funny or uplifting?
Yeah, well, I mean, I got a fun subject. I was just reading this other article while we're on immigration, and we'll move off it. That was talking about how there is about 1 million foreign students in Australia, which is crazy. There's 20 million white people in Australia, and there's 1 million foreign students in Australia. So, for every 20 white Australians, there's one foreign student, which is a massive record, obviously, in Australian history. It's just a mind-boggling statistic that I saw. But I think that's important to kind of take into consideration, because most of these students, they're not actually here to get degrees in a conventional sense. It's just a way in, and then they drive Uber. Like every Uber driver that comes to your house to drop off Uber Eats or to pick you up to take you out when you're on a night out drinking, if you use that service, and they can barely speak English, they're probably on a student visa. But they're studying some BS degree. It's just a way to get in here, and they can do unskilled jobs or whatever on their visa. And that's literally how, they talk about we need to have skilled migration to grow Australia's economy. But then all of these shitty jobs are what the bulk of the immigrants are doing, because the bulk of the immigrants aren't so-called skilled migrants. They're just abusing the student visa system. So it's an important talking point. But someone sent me this, or actually